Hi there. This month I'll be either making a video or doing it as a live. Um, I'll be talking about the Port Arthur massacre because we've got an anniversary coming up for that. This massacre occurred on the 28th and 29th of April in 1996. So down at an old prison site in Port Arthur near Hobart in Tasmania, which is our little island off the Australian south coast. Now, this event, like a lot of events, this event attracts a lot of so-called truthers. They are very bloody-minded in their belief. It's like they clamp their minds shut. It's like they put metal clamps around their own heads, padlock those clamps shut, and then swallow the keys. And the only place these truthers look for fact and reason is up the arseholes of other truthers. So they never let anything in. They don't let critical thinking in. They don't let facts get in the way of their belief system. And, you know, they're very frustrating. We all come across people at various times, don't we, that are in some sort of truther community. It could be the Ricky Allen is innocent truther community. It could be the Brian Koberger truther community, JFK, etc. And it's really, really frustrating. And oftentimes they don't realize that they simply don't have the arguments they think they do. They think they can argue about gun control in Australia. And so I thought, as a precursor, I'd just make this video. This is just clearly one for you to listen to and not watch me distractingly play with my hair and wave my hands around. I'm just doing that behind the camera here. I just thought I'd make this video just to put a little bit of background or history, I guess, and current fact out there for you, so that when I talk about it, it doesn't bog down talking about the perpetrator, what happened, and some of, you know, the things that these truthers mistakenly believe. Some of them, sure, they might have their hearts in the right place, but some of them are kind of like the flurfers, aren't they? They are as thick as pig shit, and it's very hard to get through to them. Some of them are sort of well-meaning, or they're just misguided, or they are misled, and you can usually tell these people, they're the people that just, they'll come into a comment section and just plant what they think is a fact, you know, about, oh, well, you know, now we barely have guns in Australia. Look what good it did. It had, you know, this certain outcome. And so it's comments like that, actually, that have prompted me to make this video today in the lead up to doing this live. So what happened with Port Arthur massacre was, and I won't go into, you know, I'll talk about this later, but, you know, just quickly for people who might not know, a chap called Martin Bryant, he had a hearing, pled guilty, and was sentenced to 135 years, life without parole. Actually, I think there's another 1,695 years added on for all the atrocities, pain and suffering that he caused. He murdered 35 people. 28 had severe injuries. There was 3 counts of grievous bodily harm, 2 counts of arson, and 8 counts of inflicting wounds. The arson was for a gold BMW that he hijacked after he had murdered the 4 occupants. He took a hostage in that car, took it to a place called the Seascape Bed and Breakfast, and he set the car on fire, took the hostage inside. He eventually killed the hostage, and then the next day he's also set the Seascape on fire. He's got and burns himself. So that was in 1996, and after that, pretty quickly, states and territories in Australia came to what we call the National Firearm Agreement. Now, we had a big gun amnesty, and 640,000 guns or thereabouts were handed in. They were surrendered. And people seem to think that we disarmed ourselves here. I wasn't in Australia at this time. I arrived in 97 actually. But, think that we disarmed ourselves and now we don't have a lot of guns, that people aren't armed, and this is why we don't have mass shootings and that sort of thing. Well, look, we have more guns than ever. We have halved the percentage of ownership, but when you consider our population and the quantity of guns actually owned by citizens of Australia, we have an immense amount compared to what we had in 1997, and we still have an estimated 260,000 privately owned illegal guns, and that these guns are moved around on what we'd call the grey market. So they're the undeclared weapons. But what John Howard and his gun, the truth is, think that John Howard was plotting this for some time. He'd barely come into power. And what has happened is it's the military style semi-automatic weapons that are, more difficult to get our hands on. It's not that, and obviously pistols. To own a pistol in Australia, you must belong to a pistol club, okay? So to own firearms in Australia, the firearm, you have to have, there's licensing and permits and registration, just like with vehicles. And, the irony about this, well, not irony, but, this is interesting because, neither of these things had Martin Bryant. Martin drove a car that he wasn't licensed to drive. He didn't have his driver's license. He considered himself too dumb to be able to pass a test. He didn't bother, and things were pretty freewheeling down in this, down in Australia at that time. It seems he was pulled over at one time and simply fined for not having a registration, and the attitude was, oh, he doesn't have a license, so I can't do anything about that sort of thing. It's pretty weird. He didn't have a gun license either. He didn't have permits to own guns, but he was able to just go and flash his cash and buy assault rifles. One of them was an AR-15. He had no problem buying guns. He could read the papers and buy products that way. He just went to a guy called Terry Collins and handed over $4,000 for one of his guns. Martin Bryant had a lot of he had a lot of ready cash. He was under he was under a guardianship, and he could go to the bank and get a certain amount of money out. And he did spend it very fast. He went on a lot of, anyway, I don't want to digress, but he owned a boat that he'd paid $9,000 for. He sold it quite cheaply. He got a few $1,000s, and, he was able to gather cash and able to buy guns very easily. So, the licensing, permits, registrations, these vary from state to state, but they are supposed necessities. All of our states and territories, they don't uphold these, the National Firearm Agreement perfectly. Let's just say that, okay? To own your firearm, you've got to have completed a multi-day safety course, and then, of course, there's a practical assessment at the end of that. You have to give a reason for ownership, And this is where we vary widely from America. In Australia, the reasons given are it's for sport shooting, so shooting like you might do at the Olympic Games, for example. It's for hunting or pest control. The main reason given in America is self-defense, self-protection, and that's not a reason that we accept in Australia. You've got to have your fingerprints taken and put on file. You must have secure storage. Now, secure storage, how many times in America with the mass shootings there do we hear that this is part of the problem about availability, is the secure storage just doesn't happen. And I've talked, when I was talking about Douglas J. Venables and his murder-suicide, that in the study, you know, it's a very quick occurrence from someone getting that gun in their hand and committing an atrocity, or taking it with them in the car, you know, when they get the mind to do what they're going to do. And if they had to sort of go to the storage area, get the safety storage box or room or cupboard, whatever, open, etc., it might just cool them enough where we don't get this spontaneous type of event. But secure storage. So in 1997, 6.52% of Australians owned a gun. It was 1.2 million. These figures in 2020 went down to 3.41%, but of course, you know, you've got to take into account our population rise of 40%. So down from 1.2 million to 867. But this is where these commenters you know, they just are obviously repeating things fed to them by the, you know, these louder, more sort of bold, self-assured truthers who aren't operating from a place of fact very often. And they, before they go and check these things themselves, you know we've got this problem across the board, don't we, with people that I call the repeaters. This does not mean fewer guns. Now, if we gave up 640,000 guns, we have imported over 1 million. Okay, that's imported over 1 million. Our population grew, as I said, by 40%. So it was 18.2 million. Then it's now 25.2 million. So 3.5 million guns versus the 1.2 million guns. It's a lot. Let's look at the mass shootings and the mass events in Australia, okay, and see how they've changed over time. And then we'll have a brief look at America. Now, massacres, of course, it's a touchy subject in Australia because it's a settled land, it's a settled continent, and there are, of course, horrific events, you know, genocide, the killing of Australian Aboriginal peoples, okay? But if we look at some of these recorded events, right? So 1692, Dutch survivors of a shipwreck. They had a mutiny. The ship was shipwrecked, and Aboriginal people were, we'll help. We'll lead the survivors to safety, but they ended up massacring the 25 survivors. 1840, there was an event called Coorong. It was the survivors of a shipwreck. 25 survivors. All the survivors were killed by the Ngarrindjeri people. 1861, I mean, you know, they're seen as invaders, aren't they, as enemies. 1861, Cullen Laringo in central Queensland, there were 19 people massacred. These were newly arrived white settlers. They were killed by the indigenous peoples of that land. 1861, in response to that massacre, they went and they killed 60 to 70 indigenous people. This was a vigilante party of 11. 1896, Peter Kavanagh in South Australia. He's a family annihilator. He killed his wife and kids. He was a sheep farmer and then committed suicide. 1898, the Glover family annihilation actually by the mother. She killed 6 children and then herself. 1900, there was an event in Breelong, 9 people killed and then suicide. 1905, the Bradshaw massacre, and 1911, the Ching family massacre. These again are family massacres. 1915, the Battle of Broken Hill. Now this is where we do have a spree shooting. People killed 4 and then the 2 spree shooters died. 1924 in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, that was a mass shooting, killed 4 and then committed suicide. 1924, Tasmania, the Archer family massacre. This was again an annihilation by the father. He killed his wife, 5 children, set fire to their home and then committed suicide. 1931, the Davis family. Again, father, he killed his wife, 5 children, committed suicide. You know, and since then, you know, we've had arsons, we have air disasters. So this is where someone might take over a plane, crash the plane, commit suicide. We've got vehicle attacks, you know, cars being driven into places. One was in Alice Springs, where a guy drove the car into a hotel because they refused to serve him alcohol. An arson in Brisbane was the Whiskey A Go-Go bar was set fire. Lots of people died in that. We have motorcycle gang shootouts on occasion. You know, we had a spree stabbing recently. You might have heard of that one last year in Westfield Shopping Centre in Bondi Junction, Sydney. And that guy killed 6 people and then he was shot by a policewoman. And, you know, all the way up till, there was a Monash University, actually. I think there was maybe, was that a bombing? We do have bombings, you know, we have the occasional bombings, car bombings. We had a spree killing in 2019. After 1996, Martin's event, the spree killing we had was in Darwin in 2019, and they killed 4 people. From 1996 to 2019, in between, yes, we've got attacks, and, you know, I'm not counting motorcycle gang shootouts. So taking away these type of assault rifles, what you might call semi-automatic or multi-fire shotguns. You know, there's some shotguns that you can actually get off 5 shots. That does lessen these spree shootings. It doesn't stop terrible events. You know, it doesn't stop domestic violence, murders. We had a dreadful event just a few years ago in Brisbane where, you know, a man set fire to a vehicle. He locked his wife and children in the car and set fire. You know, these atrocities happen, but we aren't having mass shootings. We aren't having school shootings like this, okay? It does make a difference. In America, you've got the highest rate of privately owned guns in the world per inhabitant. The second in the world is Yemen, and they've got half the rate of privately owned weapons. guns, firearms I should be saying. So 32% of households have gun owners in them, 10% more than that, people are living in a household where someone owns a gun. And it's 120.5 guns per 100 people. That's how many guns you have. So 40 to 42% of households, it's estimated. And the primary reason in America, it's self-protection. Ownership increased during COVID. I think it peaked at 20 million gun sales in 2021. 10% of owners are female. That stayed the same since 1980. 40% are male. That's down from 50%. And there's a decline in hunting since the 70s, and perhaps that's the difference. Rural areas account for 46%. Urban areas account for 19%. Males account for 97.7% of the shooters, and they are on average 34.1 years old. 52.3% of them are white, 20.9% are black, and then it goes Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern, then Native American, and 44% of these murderers release plans prior to the event. So that gives you some pause, doesn't it, about, and again, this is something that we've talked about in prior videos when we were talking about the murder-suicide committed by Douglas J. Venables. And so, I don't want to be repetitive, but we are aware of these issues. It's a problem. It's a problem. So we know cause is ease of access, suicidality, and that's something I want to talk about again in the next video. Maybe it'll be a briefer one than this. Because Martin Bryant was suicidal, and again, that's something that truthers just like to ignore. It's an inconvenient truth. There's a lot of inconvenient truths that truthers ignore, push aside, refuse to acknowledge. They don't open the trap that their mind is caught up in, that they self-impose over their minds. And early childhood trauma. Okay, so it's mainly those three things that are prevalent, or, that are existing with these shooters. Was there anything else I just wanted to mention about this before I go? I want to keep it under half an hour. Yeah, it was a Colt AR-15 semi-assault rifle, and people were videoing at Port Arthur. They happened to have their video cameras on. They were outside in the grounds, and they recorded the gunshots on audio. And in 15 seconds, in the first assault inside the cafe, the Broad Arrow Cafe, 12 were killed and another 10 were wounded, just in that very brief space of time. And, this is at close range. These people were captured in there, and Martin Bryant walked through the room shooting at people. You don't need to be a pot shot. And they like to say, too, that he wasn't very good at aiming and that he hadn't really handled guns before. Again, inconvenient truths elude them. Martin was introduced to guns at 14, something his father Morris deeply regretted. And that's part of what I'll be talking about as well, because that's a pattern. arming these disturbed individuals. He had been shooting since 14. He was comfortable with guns. He would often go out shooting. He would shoot at targets, or he would even shoot towards a highway. There's lots of instances recorded where he was menacing in the neighborhoods he would be in, and neighbors avoided him. They would just walk away. That deeply hurt Martin, but he couldn't take accountability for his behavior. He couldn't accept that it was his actions and his personality that pushed people away, that repelled people. And it is very sad how deeply lonely Martin was. So I'm going to be doing that video maybe as a live, but I find that very distracting, and then I don't go through things quite clearly as I'd like to. So I'll see you guys later. So I hope that arms you with some information so that we can talk about it. Oh, I was going to say about the quantity of mass shootings in America. I think there's been 4,000 since 2014, between 2014 and 2022. And a third of the world events like this, they happen in America. It's pretty deadly there. There's a major problem. It should be addressed, and for some reason it isn't, because, your Third Amendment right to bear arms, and it's mistakenly thought that, well, Australia doesn't have that right, we don't own guns, and that's why we don't have the problem. You just need to change something. It's not about disarming you. It's about making you safer, making you take it a little bit more seriously, making you accept that maybe you don't all need to own as many guns as you do, not for self-protection, etc. And maybe, you might be able to actually spare some lives that are just innocent people, often children, often women, okay? Anyway, I will go now. You all take care. Have a beautiful day. And we'll speak later. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.